early, in case people come in early. So as you come on, just drop me a little chat. Let me know you're there, and we'll get underway. But we won't officially start till 3 o'clock. But if you're already on, just drop us a little chat, and we can have a private chat before everybody else arrives. A lot of questions today. Well, a lot of topics, which is really good. So thank you to everybody who sent in all these different topics. They're pretty wide-ranging, from where to start, where to look for inspiration, how to make it relevant for children, how did I actually begin? Not quite sure what that actually adverb is in there. How did you begin? As an idea in my parents' eye. Plot creation, direct and hidden messages, that's an interesting one. Direct and hidden messages, forming stories for them. Fantasy, fairy legends, making up stories on the fly. Lots of good topics, so thank you for those. And I'm going to have jump in and just try to pluck them in and try to create some sort of narrative around them, so we're not bouncing all over the place. But I apologize beforehand if I am flying all over the place. There's quite a few of you who are coming on here today, mostly from the States and Canada. Hello, 50. So thank you. When we set it the other week, we weren't quite sure. It's a tough one, isn't it? I know a lot of you will be watching this afterwards, so that's why I try to make it as coherent as possible. So it something that you could watch on YouTube or whatever. But then a lot of you do want to be here as part of the live Q&A, so that we can start to have group chats about some of these different elements. So I am going to start. No, I'm not. We're still a minute away. Let's let everybody else arrive. And I'm just going. I've got two different computers open in front of me, so that I'm not having to go between screens and suddenly cut everybody off. Should have one question on: are you any good at multitasking as a writer? The answer is no. I don't believe you can be a good writer and good at multitasking. I think a good writer is somebody who does, put the jar of mustard away in the washing machine, and if you've got a story unraveling behind your eyes, you're only half there in the real world. So I've always had to apologize to my family for odd circumstances around the house. So lovely. Thank you all, everybody, for joining us today. Do just chat as we go, and you can help sort of guide me. As I've said on previous occasions, I'm not a teacher. I've never been a teacher. What these sessions are is a response to a lot of you who have asked me lots and lots of different questions. And they come at me through the social media and through emails and what have you. And the most time-effective way that I can cover off a lot of these is in a group Q&A like this. Whenever I talk about these things, please do look at them as just one writer's way of thinking about all these different elements from my personal experience. So this is a personal experience of writing of one person. I've been at it a long time, but that doesn't mean that my views are any more relevant than anybody else's. So just please, get as much. If this is a career path you're on, if there's something you enjoy doing, then just soak it up from wherever, of course, and just don't take anything I say as absolute. So the first question today that's come up is, where do you start and where do you look for inspiration on how to make a story relevant for children? It's actually a really interesting question, this one, because as adults, you slowly become divorced from the way children are experiencing the world, unless you have young children around you. And then suddenly, or certainly is how I felt, firstly as a father of my own children, and now as a grandparent, is you suddenly see the world afresh through their eyes, and you see what they're trying to figure out, why something doesn't make sense to them, or how they're making an extraordinary interpretation that's nothing to do with reality, but that's wonderful to watch, and how to to embrace that, and use it as an opportunity to go, well, maybe that's common to a lot of children. How do I explore that? So my own kids growing up tended to feel that I was plagiarizing their lives, because they would go, oh no, this is going to appear in one of Dad's books. They've been very gracious as they've grown into adulthood, and they haven't held me to account for any of them. But those sorts of, like, I did this whole series of 50 the Tractor, one of my earliest books series, and that was because my son Theo was completely besotted with tractors. We were renting a caravan on a farm in the UK, and it was difficult to engage him while we were both kind of working on the farm to pay for the rent. I was trying to write and illustrate kids' books, but there was a really beaten up old rusty tractor, and I could go and sit my son on this tractor, and set up a chair next to it and carry on with my work, carry on writing longhand back then before computers. So I thought, well, so if he's totally besotted with tractors, then maybe there are other children who are besotted with tractors too. And one book turned into four, and it sold hundreds of thousands of copies just in the UK, because it got launched by Walker Books through their Sainsbury's outlets, the shopping outlets. And so I did discover that, yes, there were hundreds of thousands of young children who completely crazy about tractors. So I always say, look as close as you can. People say, where do you find inspiration? It's usually all around you. It's just kind of understanding, oh, there's a story in there. So anytime you're answering a child's question, you can either obviously answer it in an honest, straightforward, factorial manner, or you can engage them with a little bit of a journey, or a fantasy journey, or whatever, so that they then question back, go, hold on a minute, can't really be true. So a lot of my making up stories on the fly with my own children was in response to things they would ask. Classically, where do babies come from at a certain age, and so forth. But then where do vegetables come from, and how come people die? All those wonderful questions you get at 7 o'clock at night, just as you're trying to get them off to sleep. So in amongst all these felt like gold dust to me. They just were, okay, this is where you're at. Do I write a direct story about it or not? So they become kind of issue-based books. I'll give you some more examples of that. One is, this was actually a question my son asked me, why do you love me? And I thought, well, that's a very good question. I mean, you kind of take it for granted as a parent that it's understood that love is, but why do you? It's not something the child does or has that makes them special to be loved, makes them worthy of love. So suddenly this whole concept of am I worthy of love became a really interesting subject. So I turned it into a book, and it's almost verbatim of a conversation that we had, and I just tucked it away and dramatized it for a story later. And then this one, Daniel's Dinosaurs, I didn't write this one, but Daniel's Dinosaurs, my son was completely crazy about dinosaurs at the time. This first page, that's actually almost exactly his bedroom that I illustrated. So I illustrated this book simply because I couldn't not do it, really. It was almost a story about my son, and everything was lying around me, and things I'd sketched for him anyway about dinosaurs. So I illustrated that for a different writer. But again, it was what was close. Then there are other things around inspiration, which are events which are growth moments. There's growth moments. If I could describe a growth moment, when a little baby, right, the younger sibling, reaches up onto the kitchen table and grabs a bit of icing off the cake and licks it. And everybody laughs, goes, oh, 18-month-old or whatever, just barely standing. No, you can't do that. And they're all, parents and aunts are all laughing at each other, look at little, da, da, da. And then suddenly the 4-year-old goes, oh, that's cool. I'll do that, lifts the hand up and rakes an entire part of icing and stuffs in his face. That's not cool. Suddenly all the adults are on top of that poor child. So it became very clear to me that there were these, why can that child do it and why can't I? Why is it funny there and why is it naughty? What is the distinctions to this? And I realized that also, I guess part of the parental process is that, being a parent, you're going through a constant state of almost mini bereavements as different parts of their lives are over. Baby in the sandpit, gone. Baby preschool, gone. And each of those are when your child is at a certain phase and it's not going to happen again. So that's why it's really lovely that when you have a chance to have that experience to Q&A the moment with your own kids. So what countries are people tuning in from today? Thank you. Mostly it's seems to be most of the States. So please chat to me and let me know where you're from, where you're coming from today. That would be very, very, very cool to see. Just drop us a little chat. Writing children's books and teaching kids how to write. So this is a whole different ballgame. So I won't go into a great deal of this, but I do spend quite a bit of time in the classroom helping teachers. Oh, the Costa family here in New Zealand, good on you. And from the US, thank you. It's got very hard to choose the right time. Poor old UK and Europe are in, can't really be on this call unless they're very, very, very dedicated or can't sleep. So thanks for joining us, everybody. And Glenn, thank you. You're here in Aotearoa too. Welcome. So teaching, one of the things, if those of you who are teachers and want to think of some of the ways to help kids in the classroom with teaching, one way is to get away from words. I particularly find, especially for young boys, they can be they can self-marginalize themselves in a writing situation if they're not very good actually with structuring sentences and so forth. But it doesn't mean they're not really good storytellers. So I tend often to work in a classroom setting with a dynamic that isn't about words on the page. And one really good game to play in the classroom, it actually mirrors one of the issues of writing a novel, which is, as a writer, you've got to be your own antagonist as well. So you set up what the problem is for your lead character, and then you don't want them just solving it immediately, right? That would be boring. You want to keep throwing obstacles in their way to make it to increase the challenge for them. And one great way to do that in a classroom is you split the class into two, and you get that class to start the story, just one sentence out loud. It can be about absolutely anything. And then the next side continues with it, and they build on it. And then you go to this team on the left, right, we've got a story here, got the starting of a story. Where do you want it to go to, team A? What's your destination for this story? What's the outcome? What do you see as the final act? And then team B, what do you see as it? And you actually get them derailing the story one for the other. It leads to some very creative chaos. And you can't often get a decent story out of the end of it because there's a battle royal goes on between the two groups. But what it does is it very, very quickly gets the kids engaging in how narrative operates and how threads remain and get built on and don't, without you having to explain it, because kids are really good at making up fibs, right? If they or mini lies, small white lies, if they need something, or they're tremendous creative storytellers at every age, because that's the whole process of evolving your brain to look after yourself and survive as a little entity in this world. Is how do you make sure you get what you need? And storytelling forms a huge part of that if you can start to manipulate the adults around you. So storytelling is a natural for children, structuring it so that it comes into the sorts of structures that we understand. It happens obviously as they get older, but the most important thing in the classroom, I think, is to get the whole class actually engaged with narrative process. Then you get into the tougher things. Okay. Any questions about that? If any of you are teachers, I can build. I can tell you some more fun games that I've played in the classroom. So we'll come back to that. Next one. How did you actually begin? So this is like where the babies come from. Where did I actually begin? Was I cloned in a laboratory somewhere? How you actually begin? No, I understand the question. How do you begin? Well, I presume how you mean how did I begin? How did I begin to write? I think like a lot of us, we were storytellers as young children. I'm sure that was the case for most of you, is you were constantly telling stories. So I was a storyteller from the moment I could open my mouth, really. I used to tell a lot of fibs in order to get attention, knowing that nobody would believe me. But the dad, I can't put the bike away in the shed at the bottom of the garden. There's the dinosaur blocking the door. Go and sort it out, please. If I was scared to go down to the bottom of the garden in the dark, I'd come up with an outrageous reason for why I couldn't do it. And of course, I wasn't expecting them to believe me, but I couldn't tell them I was scared of the dark down there. And they would interpret it as, oh, yeah, somebody better go and help him put his bike away. So storytelling is a survival tool for a lot of children. I was also a very sick baby, a sick child. So I had a lot of time in bed thinking up stories to entertain myself. But if that question is, how do I begin a story? I usually map it out. An idea will come to me, and then I'll think, how does the structure of that story work? What's the problem at the start? What's the resolution at the end? And then I kind of map the path through it. And that's the same whether it's for very young children or what you might call a chapter book for slightly older kids, or an adult novel. I tend to not go into too much plot detail at that point, but at least understand the rationale for why the lead character is going to go on this adventure. Somebody's asked about direct versus hidden messages and how to form stories around them. Hidden messages in the sense that I assume you're not meaning hidden messages like demonic messages. So a child is reading one story, but you're manipulating their brain with an entirely different. But no, direct and hidden messages. So I think of hidden messages like Easter eggs. If children know that there are certain things in there, just like in a game, that the Easter egg is a part of the process. I usually do that through illustration. I like to put little B stories that are interpretations of a moment or an extension of a moment in the text that the story narrative doesn't have to follow, but there's a secondary narrative there. So rather than hidden messages, because I don't believe my job is to teach. There are certain things which I think I've got to say, which I can sell in an entertaining way, which are universal issues that children need tools for. But I'm not a kind of Aesop's fables, hidden messages of how children need to behave, etc. But I know that's not what you mean when you say that. So when I tend to think of them as secondary elements in there. Cool. Hold on, before I go, I'm just learning how this all works, by the way. So when you send your texts, I can go back in them and have a look at what you're talking about without distracting myself too much. So making up stories on the fly, that's a really good question. Making up stories on the fly is certainly something I think that all of us at different times of our lives have done. You make up stories on the fly to get yourself out of trouble as a young child. As a traveler, I used to have to make up stories on the fly if I confronted a difficult situation on the road in a strange country. You know, I'm a talker, not a fighter. So, I will always try to talk myself out of a difficult situation. And I've always found that storytelling and humor is an incredibly powerful tool for engaging somebody who could become difficult. I found that making up stories on the fly was a very good way of keeping myself safely within a group at school. So I wasn't a complete outsider. I wasn't in the sporty group and I wasn't in the academic group, but I was very good at storytelling and telling jokes. And so a lot of people protected Martin Baynton, the jester, because he had some value and that he could tell stories. So I learned the value of making up stories on the fly. And that that is something I do as I fall asleep. I always did as I was younger, falling asleep. I used to have trouble falling asleep. So I would just set myself a story and I would structure a story and I would tell myself, stay awake till you finish the story. So making up stories every night as an alternative to counting sheep. And I nearly always fell asleep before I completed the story and often forgot half of what I wrote. And then making up stories on the fly is a great way to discover things that you weren't organizing yourself to write. So you suddenly go, oh, that's a good idea. So I know a lot of parents experience that on car journeys. Tell us a story, and you kind of go, oh, no, how do I tell? How do I tell a story on this journey and pay attention to the road and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not advocating focusing on storytelling instead of driving to parents who are, but it's a very common experience, isn't it? But by playing I Spy as you're driving. And I would simply use anything that was in the visual field to deliver a story. So if we passed a cow in the middle of a paddock that was separate from the other cows, we would, between myself and the kids, we'd come up with a narrative about why that cow was, on its own in the middle of the paddock. And I don't know, but I do that all the time now to try and explain people's behavior. And if I see someone driving erratically or someone wobbling on a bicycle or parents arguing with a teacher or a child in the playground, I automatically build a narrative around it. And I'm sure it's the case for all of us because that's how the brain works, isn't it? We're trying to understand what's taking place in front of us so that we can decide whether it's something we should intervene with or step back from or whatever. So making up stories on the fly is, I think, it's a natural function of how we function as human beings. Is to make sense of the world. We build narratives. I see people doing that a lot when we have expressions almost like like, oh, it was meant to be, or fate, or all that stuff. Well, that's because we tell ourselves stories. We look back over a series of events and we turn it into a rational sequence that becomes the story that becomes, oh, it was meant to happen. Look at how it all fell into place, blah, blah, all the rest of it. So we take chaos and we turn it into story. That's actually how we, so much of how the brain operates to make sense of the world around us as we're growing up. And obviously we continue with those tools as adults. So plot development. There's a big question in here about plot development. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about, I know a lot of you have asked questions about Jane and the Dragon and Dragonblade, so let me cover that off here by saying I'm not going to cover it off here. I am finishing the story and it will be out just after Christmas. I got sidetracked by a very, very busy time at work, and but it is happening. But in terms of the plot of Dragonblade, I'll talk about the plots in general for, and then specifically. Plots for little picture books for kids follow a very, very clear, and there are 4 or 5 models. But the one that I tend to focus on for my storytelling is that your lead character has a problem. Otherwise, they're not a lead character. So the plot is very simple in a children's picture book. You move from, here's the character, here's their problem. Then you might get two attempts at resolving it, and complications, coming on board that make it more difficult before you then finally solve the problem. But there's definitely that setup, middle, and ending. So the plots are not complicated at that age group. Then there's other kinds of books at that age group, which I talked about, the growing the train books, where you start with an event and then you suddenly, other characters join in and you get this almost fellowship of the ring of characters going on this journey. You know, it might be across the farm with the tractor going and the chicken joining and the cow joining, and they've all telling them stories about why they're going to the top of the hill or whatever it is. Those are kind of train carriage stories. And then there are the stories that I tend to avoid, which are more Aesop's fables, which are very much around assuming that you know an important truth that a child has to understand, and you want to package it in a digestible way. But that begs the question that there is a truth that you're on top of that, you know, requires telling. So be very, very sure of yourself with those ones. But then with older books, I'll talk a little bit about Dragonblade. Dragonblade. I'll talk about Dragonblade and my Saving Wonderland series. The plotting in those is very different, and there's a different mechanic at work. And of course, it's a much more different mechanic to say a whodunit, very to a murder mystery or an adventure like that, or to a road movie story. A road movie story is very often a story of growth, a story of meeting people and circumstances on a long pearl necklace of story that are each element is adding to the learning of the central character, but you're leaving those pieces behind as you carry on the road journey. Jack Kerouac on the road would be the perfect example of that. So you're not expecting those characters necessarily to suddenly reappear at the end of the book and be part of the final moment. Very often those road stories are they're not resolving a problem. They're kind of an epiphany story. They're about learning about oneself, leaving a problem behind, realizing on the journey of the problems, you resolving your problem, being able to go back and confront and accept the situation that drove you away. That's a very, very common thread. And so plotting those kinds of stories has a almost a natural sequencing to it, which you then play with, because the moment you set that up, then the reader is going, oh, okay, that's the journey we're going on. And then it's a balance between delivering that to that expectation and then playing and working against that expectation. With the Taking Wonderland series, that was a whole different, and it's taken me over 20 years to figure out the storyline of that. I knew the story I wanted to tell, and it started growing and growing as I realized I couldn't tell it in one book. So it became a trilogy. But why it's different at a plot point is because the original Alice in Wonderland books, I can't rewrite them. And my concept of Taking Wonderland is about a young Allie, a girl, who discovers, against her better judgment, because she's very science-based, she doesn't believe in any fantasy or what she calls nonsense. She discovers that Wonderland is the name of another part of the quantum multiverse that is accessible if you obey certain rules. You can slip through into that other quantum parallel time stream that's happening, and that was the one that the original Alice fell into. And then my conceit in that was, what if Alice was trying to find out who all the people were over there and trying to keep them safe and trying to keep Wonderland safe, that she would write this book about Wonderland that was kind of all the codes and all the secret ways, like a Da Vinci Code, full of riddles that would allow people who really wanted to and who cared about it make their way in and out of Wonderland, but keep the people who were there safe from people who might be, misusing the world. And then the original Alice, she's then stuck somewhere. I'm not going to tell you where. And the young Allie realizes she's got an obligation to find what she believes is her great aunt and continue her work to unlock the secrets of the book and to keep everybody over in Wonderland safe from this nefarious organization that's out in our world that's trying to break through into Wonderland and misuse it. And it turns out that Allie, because of her genetics, because she comes from a maternal line of women who seem to be able to slip more easily across the threshold. The first story is called The Secret of Safe Passage, because every time you come back, you die a little bit. You get incredibly sick. And that's why most people who return from Wonderland actually eventually die. So Allie wants to find out what is the secret of safe passage, because she knows it's hidden in a riddle somewhere in the books. So she becomes obsessed with finding it. And that's the start of this journey she's on. So in terms of plot for that, I needed to kind of know the whole arc structure of what I wanted to do, how she would find out the truth about it, what the organization was back in our world, what their nefarious needs are, why they're doing what they're doing, what Wonderland offers to a criminal organization, and what's at stake for the various characters who are trapped over there. So Allie, the lead hero, is unlocking all these things. She's very good at riddles. She's very smart. She's also the daughter of a scientist who's grown up. She's grown up in an environment of trying to understand science. So plotting that required me to take the original books, and I can't change them, but I've got to try and invent riddles. So take something that's actually in the book and say, if this was written by the original Alice, not by Lewis Carroll or Dobson, but that in my parallel universe, these were written by the original Alice, and she just got dear old Dobson to publish them under his name as Lewis Carroll. and it's her way of trying to keep all this stuff safe because she feels the bad guys are coming to get her, and she has to go through to Wonderland permanently to protect them. And so the prologue of the story is the end of her story as she goes through to try and protect them, and then the start of the main story is our young protagonist Ali, who's 15 years old, stumbling in on the fact that this really exists, denying it, thinking she's going crazy, or she's eat something that she shouldn't have eaten. Somebody's popped her a drug or something, and that so she has to scientifically go through all these and dismiss all these till she goes, actually, you know what, it's real. It's a real place, and I need to figure out how to help these people. So then the plot is trying to work out what the 3-book structure is. What is the story that I can complete to make the first book a complete experience, knowing that it's then holding out the flame, the candle flame for the next story. And so that required a lot of plot organization that took years and years and years, and then evolved into the first book. So let me go to the chats. No, anybody got any questions around any of that? I'll just keep going. Just flick me if you want to flick me if you want to move me on. If I go down a Warren and you want me to focus on something slightly different, please do. Just let me know. I'm going back down through the topics. The what someone's asked me how the what came about. It does help. I mean, in terms of this, what this subject is how ideas start. The what's for those of you not familiar with it, it's a TV show I created just after I created Jane and the Dragon. Well, almost at the same time, we were just finishing up Jane and the Dragon. And Jane and the Dragon was a complicated show with over 100 people working on it. And I wanted to figure out what could be a really nice, simple, easy show. What is the sandpit that I can play in? And so this is literally how it came about. To make a television show that's going to work all around the world, you've got to make sure you don't hit any of the red flags for certain countries. So one of the red flags is if you make it about children, then culturally they've got to be somewhere. And then they might be very wealthy, very middle class, living in a city, etc., etc. And that can automatically disenfranchise some communities around the world for it not being appropriate for their broadcasters. So then there's this making the characters really straightforward and simple so that there's a good dynamic, and then only having a couple of them because it's expensive to build characters, or was then in TV animation. So I actually came up with the concept of the what's around this desire to discover, this voyage of discovery, having 2 little characters that from a planet what who just arrive on Earth, and each series can have them exploring some aspect of life on Earth. And I thought the first one would be really good, would be wildlife. And the best way to do that, obviously in a contained way for a company, is to actually set it inside a zoo. So it allowed us to have a discussion with, on the side around zoos and what zoos do, the good sides of zoos, and then the more uncomfortable sides of zoos. But for children, it was about 2 little aliens arriving and going, holy, my goodness, that beautiful creature. What's that about? So the voyage of discovery was like, let's do 52 stories where these little characters just see a bit of an animal and go, what's that? They just said the elephant's trunk or what have you. So that came up as a very, very simple premise. And the what's, they just what's that? Because they're astronauts coming down and discovering life on Earth. So the idea was to do, and we did 52 episodes set in the zoo. Then we did, I think, 12 episodes set on a beach and 12 episodes set on a farm. And then we want to do 52 episodes underwater. And we never got that far because it turns out 78 episodes, which is what is enough then to recycle for broadcasters. You don't need to build a whole another series of them. So that was how the What's came about. It was very much focused at preschool around the joy of asking questions and taking out any cultural or ethnic or class, how wealthy, all of that goes when you just take two little aliens and put them in a very cute little spaceship and have them arrive exploring a zoo, which could be based in any country. So that's where are we? That was the what's. Getting published. I know we've covered this a couple of times, and I get a lot of people asking what's the best way to get published and all the rest of it. The first thing you have to ask yourself is, why am I writing? It's critical you ask yourself that, because if you're looking at becoming a writer because you think it could be a career that will earn a decent wage, that's really, really hard. It's very, very, very hard to make a living as a writer, or as a published author. I mean, not writing for TV or writing for the radio, or writing for the theatre, or writing copy for magazines, or I don't know any of that. I'll talk about publishing. So publishing is very, very. You can imagine it's very challenging in the sense that publishers are overwhelmed by a lot of manuscripts arriving on their desk. So they're always looking for quick ways to cull stuff. So, well, first thing you need to do if you want to be published by a regular publisher is, I would urge you to get the Artists and Writers, or the Writers and Artists Yearbook, because it gives you all the most up-to-date information about all the publishers around the world, how they like to receive material, who to send it to, what to send in, because a lot of people make send in an entire illustrated book, whereas a publisher they might love the story but not like the illustrations. Going, oh my goodness, how do I? And they go, I don't want to have that conversation, so it's a reason to pass. Whereas if you send in the story and you send in a sample illustration by somebody you would like to illustrate it, but you haven't promised it to them, you haven't contracted it, or you say, I'd be very happy to have another illustrator place with it, you make it a lot easier for a publisher to then bring a new writer to the market, because they can buddy you up with an existing illustrator and all that illustrator's brand following. So that if I would urge multiple submissions, don't look at what they're asking. Look at on that Writers and Artists Yearbook. It will tell you how they like you to submit, who to submit to, what format to submit in. Do your homework, really, really do your homework, and only send to the publishers who are looking for that kind of material. And it will become very self-evident as whether you're wasting your time sending your material to any particular publisher. But then do multiple submissions. It's not like the old days where there was an ethics or a moral expectation that you would send it one by one by one by one. In the old days, there was an expression that have an envelope with a stamp on it, ready, that when you get rejected, you bung your manuscript straight in that envelope and send it straight back in the post. How historic and out of date is that, right? Because you haven't got time. You don't want to wait to be rejected, because it takes 3 months, 4 months. You want to just get all those rejections through first and quickly out of the way. Oh, I lost for a second. Apologies. Don't know what happened there. Then do send them out. Just send those submissions out to those writers and artists. However, but do think about if you want to get published by a traditional publisher. The other way, of course, of being published is to self-publish. And I don't really want to be promoting different ways to do that. I'm currently experimenting with Kindle Direct Publishing, KDP, on Amazon. It's getting to be a much better system than it was. The books look really good. You're in charge of the whole thing yourself, but be aware that it's all about exposure. It's one thing to get your book up on Kindle Direct Publishing. It's another to get anybody to know it's there and to get the sales. So getting published and becoming a best-selling author, I don't even know what that really means. I've become a best-selling author in the kids space a couple of times, because that means, say, you've done a couple of 100,000 copies of a title in the States, for Jane and the Dragon, for example, or Daniel's Dinosaurs, hundreds of thousands in 1 year. That kind of constitutes being a best-selling author for a period of time. How to get there? Nowadays, you must be marketing yourself. The publishers, it's very difficult for them to put enough time and effort around pushing you that you need to be doing a lot of that work yourself in liaison with the publisher. But when you self-publish, of course, you can control every aspect of that. And that used to be hard in the old days, but now a lot of these self-publishing programs, there is a really good integration between how you can put your social media together and drive people to be aware of your book. But it is an art form, and you do have to spend time doing it. The old days of just writing a book and throwing it out into the universe and waiting for the kudos and the checks to come in is long gone. You have to work hard for each child you bring into the world. You've got to give it the time and attention and the love to try and give it the exposure and push it out there. Children's books which include photography, photography is particularly in very, very young picture books. The photography is, for certain kinds of books, it's a beautiful way to go. But the photography has to really be thoughtful and be an art form in there. Otherwise, it can be it can be quite a dead form. Children, they're not, for some weird reason, they're not really attracted to photography as much as they are to hand-drawn illustrations or whatever. Don't know why that is, but it is the case. How to revise a story and make it flow better. I find I have to put a book away. I will write in kind of hot bursts, try to get a chapter out, try to push through on the story part, and then put it aside, and then bring it out again a few chapters later and go back and read an old chapter. And then you'll know whether it needs refreshing, how you're going to tweak it. Sometimes, if you're a brave person, you can give it to a trusted colleague to read. But I find that you really need to do that towards the end, not while you're in the process of writing it. Otherwise, it becomes a shared process where you're leaning on the other person a little bit, and that you may be leaning on the wrong person or the wrong advice. So how to revise it is, I find that I've got two kind of brains. There's the narrative storytelling brain, where I'm enjoying telling the story, and it's flowing and it feels good. And there's other times, and I'm sure you've all felt it, it's not really writer's block, but it's like you sit down and you go, oh, I just can't get into my own book. I just can't inhabit it. I can't get the flow going. So what I tend to do then is then go back and edit the last chapter. And that does two things, really. It means that you're putting a different part of your brain on, and you're going in and just trying to make it, as you say, flow better. pop off the page better. And there's really only time that does that. If you're too close to it and you read it a few days after you've written it, you're still remembering why you wrote the sentence the way you wrote it. I feel it sometimes has to be a week or 2 weeks that gives you enough distance from it that you're reading it as if somebody else has written it. And you go, oh, that was a bit wordy. I think I could write that sentence better. Oh, hold on, yes, I can. It's my book. Let me do that right now. So time is a great way of giving you a little bit of distance from it. Well, coming back to, autobiography writing. I've got no experience in this. I've been asked to write my autobiography, but I feel I've got lots of stories. And so what I'm going to be doing is writing lots of short stories of things that have happened through my life, and then kind of put them like pearls on a necklace and see if there's a way that it becomes a kind of autobiographical look back at my life. Part of the reason for that is I'm not a storyteller. I mean, I'm a storyteller. I'm not a very good self analyst. So that and I forget everything. I forget my own childhood, and it's often when I'm only with my brothers. I'm looking forward. My brothers are coming over to New Zealand. My two brothers in January, and we're going to spend some time together. And sometimes my memories only come back in conversation with my brothers, where they go, "Do you remember?" Blah, blah, blah. And it's the same for every aspect of my life. I can only remember my kids' younger years, sometimes when they say, "Dad, do you remember when you did so and so? What was your reason for doing that?" And I went, "Oh, I do remember that. I don't remember the reason, but let me make one up now." So, but yeah, so I can't really talk to autobiographical writing. A lot of people get a ghostwriter to do it for them, and then they go in and tweak it and make it their own. Writing poetry. So yeah, I am writing a poetry book at the moment. I've been putting them up on TikTok as little just free verses. So those of you who are enjoying those, thank you for your comments and so forth. They're kind of like little Zen verses in the sense they're not hikoi, they're just little packages of thought about meditation or awareness or some aspect of watching your mind and realizing how it's playing games with you. But in poetry in general, particularly, I love verse. And I think I've talked about it before, I love A. Milne. If anybody is really interested in writing beautiful structured verse, go back and look at A. Milne, like when we were very young and when we were 6. Writing poetry for young children now is a little bit of a double-edged sword. If you're trying to write for an international market, you've immediately got the problem publishers face. If you give them a book in poetry, it's going to cost them a lot more to try and get it translated in rhyming verse form. So one of the things I always say is if you'll make sure the story really, really works without any verse, because when it gets translated, it probably won't be in verse. And a lot of stories become bloated because the verse is trying to rhyme and it's trying to bring in threads that don't belong there just to get a rhyming word into that verse or that chorus. So I always think it's very, very important to write your story out, even if you're doing it in poetry. Write the story out in without verse and make sure it absolutely works as a story. What should I look for in an agent? I don't know. I can't answer this question. It's not a world I understand. I've not used an agent myself, so I know that agents are very, very good. I know the right agent is very, very helpful. to you, and will be, you need to lean on that agent once you've got them on board. And it's very hard for agents, good agents, to take on new writers, because they've got to make sure they're getting an income themselves, and it's a massive gamble for them to take on a new writer where there's no certainty of income. So work hard to get an agent that is recommended by the industry and you see good reviews about. But don't be upset if they say, look, I'm sorry, my work, I'm just too full at the moment, I can't take anybody new. But beware the agent who says, yes, can look after you right now. I take 30%, and I don't know any publishers, but I'll give it a go. So you'll meet all sorts. What did I do to build my portfolio? I didn't actually have a portfolio. See, this is part of an age issue, right? I'm 70 now, so as I was building my career, I just got really lucky with one publisher very early on. Just worked with that publisher. Didn't build a portfolio because I wasn't going around different publishers, and I wasn't trying to be a jobbing writer, a jobbing illustrator. But if you are becoming an illustrator and you put forward a portfolio, I would suggest that you make sure that you've nailed a style. A lot of publishers find it very, very hard when an illustrator walks in with a portfolio that seems to have 20 different styles in there, because they don't know how to marry you with a particular writer. And if you think about some of the great illustrators, if you think about Quentin Blake or Raymond Briggs or anybody like, well, E.H. Shepard, you don't go, so which kind of E.H. Shepard? The little cute black line drawings that he did for Winnie the Pooh, or no, that was it. That's who E.H. Shepard was. So I find that if you want to be a jobbing artist and design artist, then have a broad range of what you can do. And there are some illustrators who do very well with having multiple styles. But it's very then hard for publishers. They want to know, who are you? Because then as they develop that brand with you, then they know what they're presenting when they go to another writer. So, oh, we want Patrick Benson to illustrate for you. The writer, oh, I know Patrick Benson's work. I'd love to have him involved. So my only perhaps note on that is, if you're putting a portfolio of art together, is do figure out who you are and have a signature style, which is you. Education. I'm very I don't work in the education field, so I really, it's better if I don't even speak to that. There is the more subtle, if you like, education, is the education of life. So parents as first teachers. I think Dragon Island, or Leaving Dragon Island, as it's now called, which is my picture book about trying to help young children deal with violence or understand violence. Obviously, that has an educational aspect to it, but it's not something that you would go out to an educational publisher with. So it's not like in a curriculum where you're teaching children stories in a graded manner, which is a whole different skill set, and I don't have it. So that's probably the end of it. So unless anybody wants to ask me a question now, I'm going to call it even. Thank you for everyone who's been on live. I do tend to just talk, so I apologize for that. I've just been trying to get through as many of them as possible. What we'll do is we'll try and break this up. We'll put the whole thing up, I think, somewhere, but we'll try to break this up into those different question topics. And so watch this space as we send this out onto social media. And thank you for your time today, those of you who've joined us live. I really do appreciate it. I've noticed I'm sliding down in my seat as the as the session goes on. That's got nothing to do with me being bored. That's got everything to do with bad posture and me just focusing entirely on what I'm trying to say and forgetting that I should sit up straight and try to look reasonably presented for this. So thank you for your forbearance, everybody. Apologies for the creaky throat as usual, and I look forward to the next one. And thank you for all those wonderful topics you wanted me to talk to. So, bye, everybody. Bye-bye.